Hello, good afternoon or good evening. Or depending on where you are in the world, it might be good morning. This is Brooks Carter, here to welcome you to another Human Development and Leadership Division webinar. This is part 2 in a series of skills for change leaders, strategic engagement skills for quality professionals by Kimberly Williams. I'm very anxious to hear the second part because I didn't want the first part to stop. We have other webinars going on. If you go to our website, there are some webinars that Adil is going to be presenting in the next couple of days. Four to be exact. It's one webinar, but it's presented 4 times. So I invite you to check out that if you have not already. But I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn Monda to introduce Kimberly, and I will wait with excitement to hear her presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, hello, everybody. I just want to remind you that you will be on mute during the presentation. However, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to type it into the question box. I will be monitoring that, especially if you're having some kind of technical difficulty. Make sure that you address me through the question box, and I will be glad to do my best to help things go right for you. We will be recording this seminar for you as we did the first half, and again it will be posted on our website, which is asqhdandl.org, and go to the webinar page and you will be able to find all of the, oh yes, there it is now. Thank you, Kimberly. That's where you're going to find the webinars, and Kimberly's presentation and her primer is on the very front bottom of the first home page. The appendix button underneath it gives you access to the worksheets that Kimberly will be using today. That's one way to get them. And also the recording from last week. If you hit that button below it, you will be able to access the recording as well. Thanks, Kimberly. There is also the ability to download the handouts right from the control panel on the right side usually of your screen. And we are going to try and hold the last 15 minutes for questions for Kimberly. But again, as you go through, please type any questions you have, and if they're pertinent or important, I will interrupt Kimberly with some of the answers. So thanks, Kim. Can you go to the next page? Excellent. And so here's my good friend Kimberly smiling out at you. You can read about her, all of her wonderful qualities on this page, but I would like to tell you a few personal things about Kimberly. She is an avid sailor, and I'm sure that helps her with change, as she has to deal with change constantly while sailing her boat, I imagine. And Kimberly is really, you're just so lucky to have her today, because she is an expert's expert on change management. And at Merck, which had about 100,000 people at one point, she was really one of 3 people who was given responsibility for the biggest and most important corporate initiatives. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Kimberly and let you, Kimberly, say a few things before you get started.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Marilyn. I really do appreciate it. And hello to everyone on the webinar today. It's great to be working with you virtually. I think the first thing we should probably do is test and make sure you can see our screen and hear the sound of my voice. So please chat us in a comment to Marilyn and I, and just say hi. Let us know where you are from. Jeff says yes, he's doing well. I'm in the New York City area today. As a matter of fact, I'm right on the Hudson River looking at the Freedom Tower. It's pretty darn close to 90 degrees here. It's been a hot couple of days, so let me know where you're calling in from today, and let's make sure that you can see and hear me. Casper, Wyoming, very nice, Jeff. Hi from St. Louis, Vicki. Toledo, Ohio, Chris, nice. San Antonio, Cleveland.
Ooh,
Georgia,
Australia, Kimberly.
Brisbane, nice. Very good. Georgia, hi y'all from, let's see, where it's Coppell or Capel, Texas. Carlos, very nice. Dallas, Albuquerque, Washington, Oregon. Wow, what a nice crew. That's fantastic. So thank you all for joining the call. This is, as Marilyn and Brooke said, part 2 of the series. So if you missed part 1, you'll still be able to follow along. I'm going to give you like a 3-minute crash course in what we talked about last time. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about the strategic engagement skills, going through some examples and taking some polls. Okay? So welcome back to everybody who's here for the second time. We had lots of folks from big companies and small all around the world last time. Very exciting. I see a couple of new people registered this time from FedEx and John Deere and a couple of others, so welcome to you as well. We've got all sorts of interesting industry representation here today. So let's do a quick look back on what we did last time. So our learning objectives for the 2-part series is to help you get a view into the landscape of change management and change leadership and how those are different. And I shared a model last time, a maturity model about how companies and people can move from really just kind of low-level, pair hands, ad hoc change management activities up through traditional change management, change execution, and get to change leadership and eventually really become a trusted advisor to the business in the deep expertise of guiding change. So specifically the human behavior that has to change in order to get the business results that you're looking for from a specific initiative. So we talked through that, and if you access the recording, you'll see that. And we talked about a concept around professional net worth. So how to evaluate your professional net worth, and if you are looking to improve your professional net worth, the 7 strategic engagement skills that we're talking about here are the avenue to do that for you. So last time we ended on the 2nd strategic engagement skill. I'm going to quickly tell you what those are. So we're going to cover the other 5 today. We're going to look at your assessment to understand what the pattern is around your specific skills so that you can walk away understanding some immediate actions that you can take to increase your professional net worth. All right. So the first 2 engagement skills we covered were first storytelling, about how to take data and really shift them to insights that are extremely compelling, that get people's attention, that get sponsors excited. You know, you're not going to have a motivated sponsor if they don't have a banner to carry around the change that they themselves are excited about. So storytelling is a really important skill for you because you're coaching that executive. The second one was we watched a short video around 12 Angry Men, a movie from the 50s. And we use it as an example of some of the bad behavior that occasionally surfaces on the part of our leadership teams and project teams when we are going through times of intense change, with the goal of better understanding, hey, what are some things that I can do to bring alignment and facilitate decision making with my leadership team. Decision making often slows down change and gets in the way of getting things done. All right, so those are the first 2 that we covered. So I have 5 more to share. I'm going to move briskly through these, so you can always come back to the recording, but if you haven't already, now would be a good time for you to download the 7 critical elements assessment. Those are 2 pages. If you're in a place that you can print them, ideally it's great to take the paper and pencil test because then you can plot your scores on the graphic on the 2nd page. But if not, we're going to be doing some polls along the way. You can follow along, but I always prefer that you see your own individual profile so you have a sense of where you're at. So pull that down and get ready to take that assessment momentarily. So Let's proceed to the third strategic engagement skill that can help you improve your professional net worth and get better results on your projects. So here's a story for you to illustrate this. There was a time that I was working in facility services outsourcing, and we had a very large tire plant in Tennessee, and it was sold to the Japanese. And so for a period of months, we went through a pretty significant transition of ownership and all of those types of things. And one day I got a call, a few of us got a call saying, listen, you guys have some serious quality problems in this plant. Obviously, moving from an American-owned to a Japanese plant, and the Japanese being, this particular organization being very committed to lean, the bar was raised immediately when the new team took control of the plant. So we flew down there, and we weren't really sure what we were going to hear. We suspected that we were having some challenges, and so we were placed into a plain old conference room right adjacent to the shop floor. And a diminutive Japanese man, young guy, came in with a blue egg crate and turned it upside down on the floor, backed away respectfully, closed the door, and left the room. And so we were all very curious, what is this? We're not sure how to interpret this. What does this mean? So we sat there and waited, and about 5 minutes later, the plant manager, who was a much more distinguished fellow, walked in and called us all over towards the egg crate. And once we were all sort of circled around him, he stepped up on to the egg crate so that he was at eye level with us, and proceeded to read us the riot act for the better part of 15 minutes. To this day, I don't know exactly what he said because he was very passionate and speaking in Japanese. But after he was done, he stepped down off of the egg crate and proceeded to leave the room, at which point his assistant came back in and removed the egg crate and translated for us what the plant manager had just told us, which was, you have 24 hours to make corrections in these specific areas, and if these corrections are not made, we're going to award this contract to someone else. And we had that contract. It was evergreen. We'd had that contract for almost 30 years, and it was worth approximately $30 million a year. So you can imagine the yield that this particular account had delivered to our organization and was expected to deliver in the future. So I share this story with you to help illustrate the third skill, which is facilitation. Because what happened after this was that I was asked, I was in human resources then, actually I was an organization effectiveness person. I was asked to pull together whatever teams were needed. They had a very, very large conference room that they gave us as sort of a war room. And over the course of the next 24 hours, we didn't sleep, we didn't leave, we didn't change our clothes. We worked at every level of the organization, from our plant manager, our account manager, regional managers, shop floor supervisors, foremen, hourly unionized associates, to address the 7 things on our list. And essentially we conducted Kaizens. But the thing that I think really stuck with me about that is that you need to be in problem-solving mode all the time. And I have to say, I think quality, Sigma, lean professionals are exceptionally good in this skill area, because you have a mindset of problem solving that you carry with you everywhere. But that really isn't true, as you probably know from some people you work with on teams. That's really not true for a lot of people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. And that makes us valuable. The ability to help someone solve their problem and move from point A to point B in the moment, on the fly, is an exceptionally valuable skill. And so, let's go to our first question. Pull out your assessment, and let's first rate it for yourself, and then we're going to do a quick poll. So on item number 3, how comfortable are you showing up in this way, in individual, one-on-one kind of in the hallway, group, and even extremely large group interactions like company meetings and global meetings, things like that, so you can spontaneously add value in the moment? How comfortable are you doing that? Go ahead and rate it for yourself. And once you have your rating, go ahead and plot it on your, create kind of a little spider diagram on our graphic. Go ahead and plot it on your graphic. And then let's go to our poll. And I'd like to ask you to, I can't see your individual responses, so please be honest. So here's the poll. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And so I'm seeing people vote, and Marilyn, now I'm not seeing the button to be able to share the results as they're happening. I only
Yeah,
have
I'm not seeing the results either, Kimberly.
So I see a close poll, which doesn't help us. I see a manage polls. Well, so we were up to about 70% voted. I'll close, and then I'll share the results. Okay, 10 more seconds. We've got about 80% of the votes in. Counting down. All right, I'm going to close her out. All right, now let's share the results.
Now we can see the results.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so not a surprise here. I mean, ranging from middle of the road, meh, to some degree, all the way up to completely comfortable. This tends to be for quality and operational excellence professionals, one of the higher scoring areas, again, because it's a part of your professional repertoire. So so good on you on that one. So I'm going to close this out, and it's kicked me out of our page. That's not good. So here are some, so if you're not necessarily happy with your score, or you just want to think about, is there anything more I can do even if I am comfortable, here's some tips for you. So one of the things that you can do is master chance encounters. It's one thing to prepare the day before for a problem-solving event with a leadership team, or a meeting that you're going to have with a project team or a colleague. But the ability to do it spontaneously and master chance hallway encounters is one thing that you can do to improve your skills in being able to facilitate solutions on the fly. The other one is showing up in group meetings. I know a lot of us who do this kind of work tend to be maybe a little on the introverted side, and so that's not, unless we're leading a meeting, we're not necessarily the folks that stand up in a group of 300 people and hold the mic. But this program is all about influencing people and persuading them to change their behavior. And so if you're in a room with 50, 60, 100, 200 people, the ability for you to be able to quickly gather your thoughts and help provide an insight or solve a problem in the moment is extremely valuable. The other thing here is, let's shift our thinking a little bit. A lot of what we do is we design solutions, right? DMAIC, DMADV, CDOV. But at times, part of what we can do is to surface what's already working and build relationships and trust with the people who are already working those things. And finally, making sure enablers are in place. I know it's a small tile, but this is the one that I use in my business to help make sure that we're really setting the organizational hooks when we're working with project teams to make sure that the solutions they're designing will stick. Using these enablers can be very helpful, and you don't have to use my model. I mean, you can Google enablers online and kind of get a sense of what some of those are. Governance structure, business process, technology, rewards. I mean, there's a good number of them on the list. But these are the kinds of things when you're working with leadership, with groups, with teams. It's a slightly different way of working. A resource that I like, this is actually a college textbook, so it's a little on the pricey side. And again, because you have these skills, this may not be the best resource for you, but I want to bring it up because a lot of people told me that it's academic, but they really liked it. It's Fogler and LeBlanc Strategies for Creative Problem Solving, and it really goes through some of the problem solving techniques and the mindsets that we need to have to be really good spontaneous facilitators. So I offer that one up to you as a resource. So let's now go to the next skill, and this one is a little difficult for me to talk about, honestly. I got a phone call one time when I was in outsourcing in the middle of the night to another tire plant, this one in North Carolina, and was told, you need to get on a plane immediately and get down here. So got the first plane out. I was there by 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. walked into the project manager's office where there was boxes of Kleenex and red noses, and it was clear that everyone had been weeping. And I looked down at the project manager's desk and saw a ball cap and a lanyard with a badge on it and a set of keys. And those belonged to a man who had lost his life the night before in that plant when he was performing preventive maintenance on a piece of equipment. This isn't the exact piece of equipment, but it was a conveyor very similar to this. And this was deeply disturbing because the entire plants are notoriously dangerous places, as you may know, and we were there in part to help mitigate some of that risk. And we've been working on the safety program with the union and with the managers for a couple of years, and our results were really getting very good. But what we had learned was that a team of 5 people went out to PM the equipment, and none of them thought to lock out and tag out the equipment. And so he was, while it was live, he was sucked up into the equipment, and it crushed his cervical spine. So I promise that we will come back to a more positive place from here. But I share this with you because I think it perfectly illustrates the next skill, which is around coaching. I don't know if many of you think of yourselves as coaches. Coaching is a term that is starting to kind of make its way into the popular lexicon, but coaching really is about asking good questions and helping to bring people to their own conclusions. And in this case, it really is about bridging the understanding across the hierarchy. Only in retrospect, even though we had tried to do all the right things, we made every resource available. We did training and education, and we did, we reinforced people with rewards and giveaways, all that kind of stuff. And we worked on the WIFM, the what's in it for me, right? We did all the right things, and it was not enough. And when we talked to the managers, they said, we feel tremendous guilt about this because we could have done more. We could have done more to take what people perceived as being a corporate program and make it into something, working with each of them individually, for them to see the personal consequences of engaging in safe work behavior. We didn't take that step. We talked about the what's in it for me, but that's different than really working with people one by one and making sure they've got it and it's meaningful for them. And it's about commitment. And so you see a graphic of a commitment curve here. It's something that I use pretty frequently, but you also see there's lots of little dots on here. That's because commitment is very individual. People don't change as groups, they change as individuals. And so my question for you here, and item number 4 on your skills assessment, is do you know what the precise techniques are to coach middle managers to be the bridge? Do you know how to do that, especially in high stakes situations where it's maybe not very, it's a difficult change. It's not something they necessarily want to do. So take a minute, rate that for yourself. Do you know what those techniques are? Do you know how to be a coach? Plot that on your graphic. And then let's do our next poll and kind of see what the sentiment of the group is. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And I think that you can maybe see it on your individual screen as soon as you're done.
Yes, we can see the poll.
Okay, excellent. So got about 50% of the votes in. If you haven't voted already, please vote now. I'm going to close it down in about 5 seconds. We've got about 3/4 of the votes in now. Okay, let's have a look at the results.
Beautiful.
So a lot more towards the middle this time. No one said that all the techniques, and some people did say, I've never heard of these things, not sure how to do them. So That is also not an uncommon response. We talked a little bit in the last seminar that even though you may be great technically as a quality or an operational excellence professional, it's likely that not many of you have encountered a lot of behavioral science built into your to your quality or Sigma programs along the way. And so that's what this is about, helping you to build those things in as you are implementing your initiatives. So these will probably be helpful to you, especially for those of you who scored sort of in the Midland area. Here's some tips that you can do to be more effective at coaching middle managers. So the first is really, as you're doing your rollout, pose questions and give things to the managers so that they can personalize the implications. I really like giving managers questions. Most people give managers answers, FAQs, and those kinds of things. I like to give them lists of questions to ask people, because when they've got questions, they can dig a little deeper with people and understand where the resistance is, where there might be lack of understanding. Help to define forums and really give the managers the words to help them, take this from being some big corporate far off thing, even if you're not in a big company, a home office thing, to being something that's important locally to the people who are working there. And I'll tell you, creating interim solutions is also really important, because I can't even tell you when I'm in workshops with people together and we're talking about this, how many people say, but Kimberly, some of our middle managers have some skill gaps. Yep, all middle managers have skill gaps. That's why they're middle managers, not senior managers yet, right? They still have things to learn. And if we wait for the next, HR or management development program to come along to make them better managers in general, it's going to cost too much and take too long. And so being really specific about developing their skills for this initiative that you're trying to implement right now in the moment, the little things, propping them up and helping them do it, is hugely important. It builds their confidence, and they're able to walk away and say, aha, I can do this. There's a really good book called Executive Coaching with Backbone and Heart that I recommend. It says executive coaching, but it really is for coaching managers at all levels. I love it. And one of the things that I like about it is that it gives you a lot of those coaching questions that you can ask. And I know all the time also, you can't necessarily access all these managers, right? A lot of these people you don't know and you don't see. But if you can pass these things along to them or cascade them down through their leadership, now they've got a resource that they'll actually try. They'll actually use it. Okay, so those are some tips on if this is an area where you want to strengthen where you're at today. Those are some things that you can do.
Kimberly?
Yes, ma'am.
Before you go on, I have a question here that says that this from Diane. Her challenge is not so much in helping middle managers personalize change or bridge the hierarchy. Her challenge is doing so without triggering retaliation.
Retaliation, Diane, retaliation on the part of the managers or on the part of the people that they are leading? I'm going to open my question box too
from
now.
the manager being coached, she says.
Okay, so what's the nature of the retaliation, Diane? That I think I'm not getting that part.
Sometimes there is a fear about someone knowing more about a situation than they might. So I guess it means that you're exposing them not knowing something.
Yeah, so that's a really big issue. Managers are always uncomfortable communicating ambiguity. And so part of what you can do to help them is help them to understand that by trying to give people all the answers all the time, they're actually conditioning people to expect all the answers all the time. But after you do this once or twice and you say, listen, we're going to tell you what we know when we know it, essentially, and you open the bag slowly, right? And you're putting information out there in pieces as opposed to a big bang, you start to condition the organization to trust that the right information is going to come at the right time. But until you have created those conditions, people don't trust that the managers are going to tell them everything, and the managers aren't ready to communicate until they think they know everything, which is going to be never. So you showing them how to communicate in a new way, in pieces around the ambiguity, and giving them some of those answers is what needs to happen.
Kimberly, this is Brooks. Something I would add is anybody who has every answer quickly destroys their credibility.
Exactly. So, helping to shift the dynamic with the managers instead of just continuing to try to feed the information machine. I know it seems counterintuitive, but releasing the information in good bite-sized chunks, and people very quickly become conditioned to how much information they're going to get on what sequence. That is a better way to do it, because otherwise you condition people to want to know everything all the time, and that is a failure mode.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Good. Thank you for the question. All right, so I'm going to keep rolling. So I think a number of folks last time were asking about unionized environments, and I want to let you know that everything that I'm sharing you here has been tested in unionized environments. Believe me, I worked in outsourcing for 12 or 13 years, and I have worked with the Teamsters, the IUOE, Service Employees International Union, United Auto Workers, Canadian Auto Workers, Be Still My Heart. So I've worked with some very recalcitrant unions, and everything that I have shared with you here does work in that environment. So here's a good union story for you all that have folks in union folks in on shop floors around the world. So we were in an outsourcing environment, and we got a contract for a major stadium here in the New York area, one of the biggest stadiums anywhere. And we were taking over a staff of maintenance people, so electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and they did all of the maintenance for the stadiums. They did the setups and takedowns for rock concerts, football games, you name it. One of the things that we discovered that we were brought in as we started to go through the bid process, we were looking at the labor rates, and we found that some of the union electricians, for instance, and this was more than 10 years ago, were making $250,000 a year. And so we were brought in to understand the work, right-size the work, where we could renegotiate some of the work rules. Well, this was, I hadn't been spending a lot of time around change management at that point. The company had a very specific process for coming in and taking over the work, and so that's what we followed. And it didn't go well. So we immediately were getting all sorts of resistance. There was a high level of anxiety on the part of the workforce. They truly believed they were all going to be laid off, which was, we weren't even intending on laying off 10% of the population, or even less than that. I mean, we were looking at renegotiating work rules. But we communicated that. It wasn't effective. The way they let us know that they were resistant and uncomfortable with us having taken over this job was one week, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus came to town. And so a couple of the union guys decided it would be an interesting way to send a message to go out and pry open the sunroof of our project manager's car, and then go back and get wheelbarrows of elephant dung and fill up his car with elephant dung. Okay, so when I tell you that these kinds of things work in a union environment, that's the kind of environment I'm talking about. So very active resistance on their part. And I use this to illustrate the point. One of the most important things that we need to do is to mobilize others to actually make a behavior change. Okay, as a group, a lot of people at the same time. Change happens individually, but it can't happen individually one at a time over a long period, right? It needs to happen individually, but in a very close time proximity, right? So the next skill is about engagement, right? Do you know how to get people to really flip their behavior, and to do it on a time frame that works for your project, not a time frame that's got a really long tail. So, item number 5. Do you know the techniques to mobilize large numbers of people to action, especially when the changes are going to be difficult. So answer that for yourself on your sheet first. Go ahead and map that to your graphic. And then let's kind of get a read from the group. Oh, hey, we've got someone from Shanghai. Welcome, Shanghai. Wei Lao. Nice. Let's go ahead and take our poll.
One of our comments, Kimberly, is that Tony Robbins would call the elephant dung situation one of having taken massive action.
I agree. I am a Tony fan. Oh, very funny.
Okay, here it comes.
So, do you know those techniques to mobilize people to action, especially when it's unpopular, and to do it on a short time frame? We're talking about getting people to, kind of turn on a dime, right? We need change to happen quickly. Oh, someone said completely. Good for you. We've got a little different distribution here. 78% of the vote in, so I'm going to close this down in a second. Little broader distribution on this one. 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Going to close the poll. Share the results. Yeah, so we've got maybe one or two people who said completely, but for the most part, we're in this range, and I think this is one of the first polls where we're seeing really not at all, not comfort level around. Maybe you can get one or two people to change, but when you're talking about dozens, hundreds, thousands, or like Marilyn and I have done in the past, tens of thousands of people, you really do need to know the techniques that work. So good for you. All right. So if you would like to improve your scores here, here's some things you can do. So again, positioning managers to coach their people, right? Very different way of thinking about the role of the manager, not directing, but rather asking questions that allows people to process and come to their own conclusions quickly, right? So you're giving them specific questions to do that. Here's one that I like a lot and where I think a lot of change management programs fall down. After we're asking people to make these changes, we basically say, if you have any questions, go see your manager. Where really what works much better is, for those of you who've done technology implementations like SAP or something like that, there's that super user model in technology implementation. Turns out that works really well for almost every type of behavior change because...
Excuse me, Kimberly, sorry to interrupt you. We're still on the poll here.
Oh, so is that better?
That's it.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the feedback. I was not seeing that the poll was still up. So orchestrating peer-to-peer help at different types of levels takes the authority out of asking a question, figuring out a problem, right? Sometimes the manager is the right go-to person, and in other cases, people don't want to go there because they don't want to look stupid, they don't want to ask the wrong question, so it's easier for them to figure it out peer-to-peer, but you need to make sure they're asking the right peers, so kind of setting up that little network inside the organization so they have somebody to go to is important. And facilitating other support mechanisms, right? Things like shifting out the work temporarily, helping, providing some financial resources if overtime or something like that is needed. Those little things, first of all, buy a ton of goodwill if you are able to anticipate them in advance and people don't have to come to you and say, this isn't working, you need to devote some resources. So if you can anticipate some of those things in advance, you build a lot of goodwill and people will give you discretionary effort as a result of that. Again, another really great resource to help you identify some of these targeted questions that you can help managers with is Leading with Questions by Michael Marquardt. All right. So let's keep moving. I'm looking at our time, and our time is ticking away. So years ago, I was involved with an organization that had done a major acquisition, and as a part of that was again in outsourcing. There was about 2,000 accounts, individual location in Canada, the United States, and Puerto Rico. And what we were hearing was this like drumbeat in the organization from the individual account managers. We want our P&Ls. We want our P&Ls. We have no visibility into how much or if we're making any money. All we see is our expenses, how much we're spending on tools and materials. We don't really have the interactions with the customers. The regional managers are doing that. How can you expect us to drive performance and drive sales with our customers if we don't know what our financial results are? So the chairman heard this, and he put a team of us together and said, all right, you guys got to go out and fix this. We were simultaneously implementing JD Edwards. So it took us about 6 months to carve out all of these intricate P&Ls for all of these locations and get all of the plumbing and wiring in place so all the money flowed in the right direction. And we've had them all ready, and we announced it, and we did a big communication, and guess what happened? We don't want P&Ls at our account. These things are bad. We said, what in the world are you talking about? You've been asking for these things for a year. And so the lesson here is, even when someone is asking for the change, once you give it to them, you design it and you make it possible, don't always expect that people are going to welcome it with open arms, because the moment you give it to them, it creates an accountability on their part that they may not have anticipated. And all sorts of interesting things happen after that. So in this case, in some cases, some of our project managers hadn't graduated from high school. They didn't have the basic accounting experience to be able to read and interpret a P&L. In other cases, we were hearing the regional managers were making life difficult because while they used to have the money, the flexibility to push the money around across a portfolio of accounts, now they were putting pressure on their managers and saying, well, if you're going to get the P&L, I'm going to give you a 10% growth target to go along with it. So got all sorts of interesting behavior out of this. But this points to the skill of really being able to negotiate accountability agreements with people that truly last. Many times as we go through a handoff, we'll go through we'll look at the control plan, we'll go through the FMEA, we'll work through the decommissioning checklist, right? Check, check, check. We think we're doing all the right things. But remember, this is about persuasion and influence, not the technical part of the handoff, but the eyeball-to-eyeball contact with other human beings, either who are taking ownership of this or who still have a role in delivering a piece of it. You know, sometimes we close out the first phase of a project and enablers still need to be designed and completed. So this is the person-to-person, eyeball-to-eyeball conversations that happen to create accountability that is going to last. This is one of the most critical things that is forgotten when we're trying to sustain results. And if you go back and you look at some of the failures where we were unable to sustain results, many times the root cause is around the accountability agreement. So do you know how to create those eyeball-to-eyeball agreements? What should be in them? When do you do them? How do you have them? Do you know how to do that with individuals and groups to make sure that you are passing along the accountability to get lasting results? So go ahead and answer it for yourself on your assessment first. And then we will plot it. And while you're doing that, let's go to our poll. And talk to me about accountability agreements and whether or not you feel like you know how to do those.
Okay, the poll is up.
Okay, good. 75% of the votes in. All right, I'm going to close it out. 3, 2, 1. Here we go. And this time I am going to remember to share the results.
And there they are.
Yeah, okay. So I find that because of the rigor that is often involved in handing off on projects that are run by OpEx quality folks, I do find that these scores tend to be pretty good. But keep in mind, it's the eyeball, it's the human persuasion part of this that's important. And so so these are pretty fair to middle in here. Mostly around looks like we have a pretty normal distribution here. So no big surprises there, I don't think. Hide results, there we go. And so let's go back to the presentation. So if you want to do more here, and I'm really going to start speeding up a bit, my apologies for that, but we've only got 15 minutes left and we've got a couple more things to cover. So agreements, really look at this from an outcomes perspective. Oftentimes when I look at what's left over after a project, what I see is a task list. The problem is it's possible to complete that task list and not to achieve the outcomes that those tasks actually were intended to get. So rather than passing along a list of tasks, pass along a list of outcomes, and I promise you it's going to be a very different conversation because people are a little more reluctant to just go ahead and sign off on things that they are agreeing to deliver rather than things that they're just agreeing to do. Make sure that the enablers that we talked about back in Facilitate are in place. So really audit what's been done and make sure those organizational hooks are set. I really get nervous when when I see a list of things at the end of the project that say, create field Salesforce bonus plan. That's a big project. And how are the rewards going to work in this new structure or new model that you've designed if there are absolutely no rewards in place and those things are probably not coming for 6 or 8 months? So really looking critically at, do we have those enablers, those hooks in place before we decommission and not just sort of tack those projects on as a phase 2 piece of work. And prompting conversations around accountability. This is one of the most difficult things because sometimes these are conflict conversations. And I have had plenty of conversations where someone had operational amnesia at the end of a project and needed to be reminded of the things that they had agreed to earlier. So, mentally prepare yourself for that. There's a cool book called Making Yourself Indispensable, The Power of Personal Accountability. This is a book that is written to us as individuals, but I just found all sorts of little interesting gems that you could turn around and use with your business partners to help them increase their personal accountability. So that's a good one as well. And by the way, in the handouts, there is a one-page kind of handy-dandy desk reference that you can put under your blotter that has all of these, a summary of all of the skills and the resources that go along with them. All right, so last one, and then we're going to start heading towards closure here. So early in my career, I worked for a guy named Ed. This is not Ed. Ed was a former security guy at the CIA. He was a very difficult personality. He was much older than me, and I was, I think, 22, 23 years old at the time. And I had just come out of graduate school and had, grand visions of playing a strategic role for the president of this particular business unit. And I was in HR at the time and had a lot of quality background, was doing a lot of organization effectiveness work, so really could bring more to the table than just sort of HR transactional stuff. Ed had a very different vision, having come out of the government. His vision was that I was a personnel clerk. And so we really had to spend some time negotiating how my role was going to be positioned in the organization. I think I quit about 5 times. I think he fired me about 9 times. I did end up working for him for about 5 years, and he ended up being a great advocate for me. But the lesson here is sometimes people want you to play a role, and we all get paid to do a certain kind of job in the organization. But you can do it well and strategically, right, where you contribute to the company and you get something for yourself, or you can play it in a way that you're somewhat diminished, that you leave going home at the end of the day feeling like, wow, I didn't make the contribution I really could have. They don't understand me. They don't know what I can do. I've got skills that I can contribute. This really is about, if you want to persuade and influence to change their behavior, you need to get your role positioned to be able to influence others in that way. Because if they see you as a pair of hands, you will not be able to influence at a strategic level, at least in most organizations. So, how is your role positioned today? Are you positioned as a strategic advisor so your services can be used and the company's getting maximum value out of you and you can get the maximum rewards? Or are you operating, maybe a smidge or maybe more below the level of contribution you really could make if you were positioned a little bit differently with your leaders? So go ahead and rate yourself. plot it on your chart. I'm going to open the poll.
And there's the poll.
Fantastic. So go ahead and register now. Got about 60% of the votes in. All right, I'm going to close it out in 3, 2, 1. So very good. So this is an atypical result, I would say. Most times when people answer this, they say they are in the 3 and 2 area. Now, keep in mind, this is, and I maybe should have been more clear on this, this is about positioning leaders around change and changing their behaviors. So, if part of what you were thinking here was that you're influencing leaders around process redesign, business improvement, things like that, that could potentially account for some of these results. Generally, I see 3s and 2s here. Because what people say is, I have difficulty even having a conversation about change management with my sponsor because they don't like to hear the words. And honestly, I know Marilyn and I experienced this from a number of different sponsors at Merck and elsewhere. And I'm an advocate of not even using the words change management if it doesn't help you influence. Talking about the outcomes instead of the methodology. But this is very good score. Congratulations to you on this. I'm happy to see it. This means that you're making progress with our leaders out there, which is what we want to do. So if you'd like to do more here, and at least 30, 40, at least 50% of you said that you wanted to, here's a couple of tips. Sorry for the small writing here, and sorry we're hitting this late in the presentation, because this is really one that I'm passionate about, but I cover it last because it really runs underneath all the other ones, right? It's foundational. Make sure you've got good working agreements in place with your sponsors. And by that, I do not mean when are we going to meet and how often and how much time. I'm talking about using mutual feedback. I'm talking about how are you going to cover me if I get into a difficult situation, if you've got some politics on the initiative, for instance. Now, that doesn't have to happen in every conversation. This is about building a relationship. But mutual feedback is a way to do that quickly. And remember, the goal here is to move you from being a pair of hands, far down to the left on the model we talked about last time, really up and to the right, because that's where your influence lives, that's where your impact lives, and that's where increased income lives, right? So really thinking about where am I spending my time and what am I working on. Having presence and influence, knowing how to tell your story, knowing how to operate when you're doing something countercultural, those are the things that you need to think through, the issues you need to think through to get yourself better positioned. There is this awesome little book called Helping from Edgar Schein, and it's maybe 100 pages long, but it talks about how to offer your services, especially to senior people who are higher than you in the organization, so that your services actually get used, and about how the power differential can impact that conversation. So it's a shorty and it's a goodie. So go ahead and take a moment to connect the dots. And if some of you may have answered this just for yourself, some of you may have 2 lines, one for yourself, one for your team, as was shown in the instructions. But here what we're really looking for is where do you have a chance to coach your team? So for instance, in alignment, maybe you're really good at that and your teams or your leaders aren't so good. You can be a coach. And in other cases, neither you or your team are very good. Maybe that's where you need some resources or some help. Maybe there's some area in which people on your team are better than you at something and you can leverage them. But kind of sitting back and taking a look at, and role positioning as well. I'm sorry, role positioning is in the middle because it is so foundational to everything else. And typically, if your role positioning isn't good, these things are correlated with that, right? So if you're not well positioned, it's hard to influence people to allow you to do these other things. Okay. So let's kind of give ourselves a quick look back to the beginning. The mandate for you is to learn these 7 skills so that you can add more value and improve your network. Being that strategic coach, positioning yourself, aligning leaders so that they're really effective at making decisions that you need, really being spontaneous about helping people solve their problems, persuading through the middle level of the organization where lots of times we get stuck, mobilizing a whole lot of people from a distance, right? In a lot of cases, you can't be there to give the stump speech. You're not working with them directly. You need to know how to do it from far away, and creating that deep accountability. There's accountability agreements to get results. Okay, so that really is where we are landing. So if you want to leave here, we never see each other, talk to one another again. Here are some things that you can do right now to get this going in this way of thinking, the skills that need to be in place to really help you and your team work at a higher level. Give them the one-page assessment that we worked on today, right? Get them thinking about what can they do to have more impact in the organization. Have lunch and learns about these things, right? Share what you learned on the call today. A number of organizations that I have worked with have identified practice leaders in each skill area, and they put a little thing in their online portal, and their role is to collect articles or books or whatever on that subject, so that if people want to learn more about it, there's a quick and cheap resource internally to help them do that. And you could also attend one of my programs. So Marilyn, I'm going to do about a 2-minute infomercial here because I know we want to do some questions. If you're interested in resources, I have a couple programs that you might be interested in. The first is one especially for OpEx professionals. I'll be doing that in the fall. That will be a virtual live program for 8 weeks. And I'll also be doing a 2-day course that is across all disciplines here, probably in the New York area, also in the fall. If you're interested in becoming certified, you just take this course and continue on for 4 more months. A couple of times a month we have coaching calls, and I've also got Train the Trainer and some other things. These programs, by the way, have been tested at a whole host of fantastic client groups. We go very deep in the coaching into how to work with senior leaders, how to use the questions, how do you mature change capability in your company. And what's different about these is that most programs focus on methodology, right? The what. We talk about that, but that's not where the focus is. The focus is really on your engagement skills and how to position you in that coach role. Work with lots of clients around the world. They have outstanding things to say. I will pass along to you after the program a brochure that has some of their additional comments. But I'll tell you one MBB, one of my favorite comments of all times is that it hit him like a ton of bricks. He didn't know there was this much more to know. So if this resonates with you, get in touch with me. If you're interested, I'll send you a monthly newsletter. You can learn more about it or join me in a program. And I'm always open to connections on LinkedIn. So with that, we talked about raising the capability of people in the organization to change. Change leadership skills are the way to do that. They will enhance your professional net worth. There are not 100 of them. There are only 7. They make a huge difference, and there's some resources available to help you if you are interested. Okay. So with that, I apologize. We're just a minute before our time, but if people have an interest in talking, I'm happy to stay a couple of extra minutes.
Yeah, I think, if you would like to stay, if you have to leave, we certainly understand. But I do have a few questions on the question log, and if you have more, please do enter them now. So the first question is a basic one about coaching. And do you think that all people are coachable? And I would add, how do you know those that aren't, and how do you cut your losses if you do?
I do not believe that all people are coachable. For me, it starts with the working agreement and the question about are we going to use mutual feedback as we work together. I've never had anyone say no verbally, but I've gotten a lot of body language. They were really uncomfortable. And what that tells me is that very early on in the beginning of the relationship, you're seeing that someone may not be open to your feedback. Okay. So continuing to test that is important. And It's in the feedback that you give and how you give it. You will get a response from them that will start to give you data about whether or not this person is coachable. And if you're continuously giving feedback and using sort of the reasonable person standard, if you're giving feedback and you're asking for an action and that person is consistently not taking those actions, or you're getting excuses or pushback or whatever, at a certain point you need to determine if you believe, do you think it's you? Do you think that they are in fact coachable, or maybe you just don't have the skills or persuasion or the chemistry with this person? That's a possibility. But more often, we keep trying over and over to coach someone who is not coachable, and it damages the relationship. So my advice is always, when you think you're working with someone who's not coachable, it's a good thing to let your boss know that in a very objective way. After 3 or 4 times, to start creating the expectation. Listen, I'm providing objective input and asking for a response, and I'm not getting that. So there may be other ways. You may want to get your boss involved, other advocates involved. But the person's going to give you the data about whether they're coachable or not, and after you understand after numerous times that they're not accepting your coaching, sometimes you need to pull the plug.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of what you say makes total sense also in the fact that there's a certain amount of bravery that that comes into this. You have to have, someone at some point said, this is all about trust.
Yeah.
But it's not just about trust, it's about building trust.
It is about building trust and accelerating how you build trust. And one of the reason I asked about skills is not to impugn anyone who's on the call today, but a lot of people think that they're giving coaching, and they're not. They're not coaching their leader. They're actually giving their leader a list of to-dos and asking them to do things. That's not coaching. So, first understanding what coaching is critical to determining whether or not somebody is coachable. You may not be coaching them.
How do you know if you're not coaching them?
So I would recommend looking into the book that I described. We talk a lot about coaching in my programs because there is so much misunderstanding about it. But the book, Coaching with Backbone and Heart, describes a coaching model in there. And that you can use that as your yardstick to say, oh, well, I thought I was giving my leader input, and that meant coaching. In fact, I wasn't coaching them at all. And now maybe I want to make some changes in my own behavior and start becoming a better coach. And when you become a better coach, you get better outcomes. So there's a few tentacles there that you have to think through before you just conclude someone's not coachable. But if you do get to that point, cut your losses, because a lot of great change leaders have taken a black eye because they worked too hard trying to coach an executive that was not coachable.
Yeah. And I think one last question, Kimberly, and then there's lots of interest and lots of questions around coaching. But I lost my question because my screen moved. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So how do you coach up, specifically when you see the need but it's not requested?
Yes.
I mean, can you coach if someone doesn't ask you to coach? Is that more spontaneous facilitation than coaching?
Yeah. So in order to coach up, you need to go through a series of steps before you just show up on someone's doorstep and offer unsolicited coaching. First of all, never ask if you can serve as a coach to someone. It immediately makes them suspicious. There are too many definitions of what it means to be a coach. It sounds really, really self-serving, and it sounds a little arrogant, right? Like, I know so much about this subject matter, I'm going to coach you, right? How do you think that? I mean, it immediately makes the person feel backed into a corner. So I would do this in a really stealth way, but you need to earn some credibility. You need to work on your presence. You need to have a lot of business acumen before you can just show up on someone's doorstep and start coaching them. And as we talked about a couple of times now, I really like to have an explicit conversation about mutual feedback, Because if you can get someone to say, yes, I'm open to your feedback, you have taken a huge step, right? That doesn't mean they're going to take it all the time, but it means they're going to open their perspective to let you in. And everyone doesn't do that the first time you ask them. And so if you're showing up cold, or you're a junior person, or you don't know a lot about the business, that executive is immediately going to sniff you out and say, I don't know how much I value your input because I don't know if you really know what you're talking about. Right?
Yeah.
You would do the same thing. You don't take it as a criticism, right? Any of that, us on a really important issue, someone who shows up that we don't really know, like, or trust, we don't know their capabilities, says, hey, can I coach you? I would be very skeptical. And so lots of times it's how we are asking and that we haven't done the appropriate setup to position our role to be able to offer the input. So getting yourself set up is key.
Kimberly, all things being equal, do you think internal or external consultants have an easier time of getting credibility to coach?
I think what's easier for external is that they come with a reputation. Oftentimes they can get the executive on the side alone, one-on-one conversations. That can be more difficult for people to do internally. The other thing I would say is that most consultants are taught these coaching skills right out of the gate. Junior consultants are taught how to talk to executives. And lots of times people like us who work inside organizations don't have access to someone like that to teach us. And if you try to get a consultant to teach you those skills, let me tell you, you're going to have a really hard time doing it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm really proud of what I do, because I can be that neutral third party, right? Because lots of times there's not someone for an internal person to go to. So I don't think an external consultant is better. I think an internal consultant who is skilled can be equally good. I just feel like an internal consultant is at a little bit of a disadvantage because they don't always have somebody to go to learn the skills. That's the challenge.
Thank you, Kimberly. I think we've run out of time. We have still a few other questions, but may I encourage people to speak with you offline if they have additional questions? How would
That's
you like to handle that?
I think the best way, Marilyn, is if we did, if maybe they can email them to someone who can consolidate them. It's challenging for me to answer dozens and dozens of emails individually, especially when lots of folks are asking the same questions. So if we can have those questions go to one point where they can be consolidated, then I can create one email and send it out to everybody who's on the phone.
So I'll offer my email if you want to send a question to Kimberly. I'm putting it up on the question log now. It's mmonda@mondaconsulting.net. And feel free to ask any questions. For Kimberly, I will collect them and send them on.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for doing that, Marilyn.
John, I don't know the answer to your question, but I'll look into it. John is asking, can a discussion board be started? Brooks, do you have any idea about that? He may be on mute.
Yeah, I think
okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your time and your attention, Kimberly. What a wonderful 2 hours this has been. Thank you so very much. And I want to thank everybody who stayed late to participate in the question and answer period.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, and it was great meeting everybody virtually, and thanks so much for your participation and your questions.
Thank you. Oh, okay, Stephanie, maybe we can follow up on the LinkedIn group discussion board.
Great, good idea. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
All righty, bye-bye now.